Welcome back to Horns Eye Studios for another episode of 666 Seconds of Murder. That means each one of these videos is less than 666 seconds, which is, as you know, 11 minutes and 6 seconds. So let's get started talking about the Idaho 4 case and talking about some DNA stuff. But I promise I'm going to keep it simple. But it is important to remember with all my videos, these are for informational purposes only. I'm not saying anyone's guilty of anything. That's for a court of law to decide. Now, I'm sure that most of you have watched videos about the DNA in this case. And if you're like me, your head wants to explode with all of the technical jargon that they use. And I figured since you guys like that straight to the point approach I take here on my videos, that we could break it down in simple terms that all of us can understand, including me, and do it in 666 seconds or less. Now, most people think DNA is just DNA. And once it's found at the crime scene, that's it. I mean, that's lights out evidence against the defendant. Can't get away from that. Well, in the case of transfer or touch DNA, like in the Idaho 4, that's not the case at all. I've discussed that in other videos of mine, but this one I'm going to concentrate just on the DNA part of this. Now, I'm not a scientist. I'm a high school graduate, but I've read a lot of literature about this, articles, watched a lot of stuff. Feel like I know the subject well enough to put this video together. But again, I'm not coming from a scientific background. Now, touch DNA can contain things like skin cells, but not blood or semen or any other bodily fluids. So a person could pick up, let's say, a towel at a store to see if they want to buy it, put it back on the shelf, and then someone else buys it. And let's say they take it home and put it on their shower or towel rack, and now your touch DNA is on this towel. You've never been to their house. You don't even know this person. But let's say a crime was committed there at the house. Now your DNA is there, and that could be as simple as that. And how scary is that idea? Now, in the case of the knife sheath, there were many ways that Bryan Kohberger's DNA could have ended up on that button snap. He could have looked at the knife at, let's say, a pawn shop or a gun show and didn't buy it, set it back down. Someone else buys it, and you know the rest of the story. Or maybe pumped gas, and someone came in after him, used the same pump, and now his touch DNA is on them, and then they touch the knife sheath and so forth. Or he could have been hanging out at Sigma Chi with the frat boys playing around with K-bar knives. But, you know, there are endless possibilities here. But how reliable is this touch or transfer DNA? Well, Bicca Barlow, isn't that a cool name? Bicca Barlow, an expert on the subject, testified at the grand jury and said it should never be used as evidence. It is only a tool to help the investigators. I kind of, compare it to a lie detector test. Same thing. It's not admissible in court, but they can use it as a tool to see if somebody's telling the truth or think that they're telling the truth. But it's a good way of doing that, and I get it, but it's not evidence. Smaller police departments, I've read, are more prone to misusing this touch DNA for the simple fact that they're a lot of times, much less, staffed as well as less funded than the bigger departments. So I get that. Now, experts say that you need 500 picograms of DNA to get reliable results. In this case, there are only 90 picograms. So that's 18% of what is needed for an accurate sample. They say you could balance the DNA in this case on the head of a pin. That's how small we're talking about. Now, when you're looking at low amounts below 500, this creates what's called a stochastic effect, which means basically that the analyst has to do some guessing. In the case of 90 picograms, the analyst has to make educated guesses to fill in the missing parts of the DNA. And that's where that gray area sets in. It's also said that a partial sample can't be compared to a full sample and be conclusive. So since the whole fiasco with the trash in Pennsylvania, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me because they're using his father's DNA, which was a full sample, and comparing it to Bryan's touch DNA, and that's just not the way it's done, according to the experts. If you were on trial for your life, would you want anybody guessing on the evidence? Probably not. Now, recently, we've been hearing about brass and the issue of the DNA degradation on that brass. Now, this information is stemming from a study done from Forensic Science International Genetic Study, and the document is called Trace DNA and its Persistence on Various Surfaces, Part 1, Metals. Several scientists did this study of how long DNA lasts on various metal surfaces. Now, since I'm the metal guy, and we all know this, I should be considered as an expert too, but just kidding. It was talked about on various channels that K-bar knife sheaths use brass in the button snap. Apparently, DNA doesn't last very long on brass. But the study that I mentioned used DNA from trout, and other materials created in a lab for this study. The fish DNA has a lower pH than human DNA, so it's going to react differently. So while it seems I think we're on the right track here, I don't think this is going to work as something that's going to show that brass would have, degraded the DNA sample, like they're saying or people are claiming. I'm just not sure about it, but it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to use that. Now, I've heard it takes as little as 4 hours, but it could be more like 24 hours. So that's a pretty good swing there. And we just don't know without the right study to know that if it's, actually Bryan's DNA, that means it would have had to last at least 13 hours if you believe the crimes happened at 4 a.m. More if you think it was earlier. And he would have had to have left the DNA at the scene and not prior, like in his apartment, getting ready. So is that another reason why they changed that timeline to make the DNA last a little longer, so to speak? Because we know Payne didn't show up until 4 p.m. Now, when it comes to this case, they get the DNA from the trash in Pennsylvania on December 27th of 22 and got the results from an Idaho lab on the following day, 12/28, and arrest him on 12/30. That seems awfully fast, especially in the first Idaho lab. They weren't able to get any DNA off the sheath. Then the second lab, this Othram Labs in Texas, was able to do it for testing. And that seems awfully quick to me. Now, I'm not saying Bryan Kohberger is guilty or innocent here. I'm just saying that the touch DNA is very unreliable, and I'm not sure how people can be so convinced that he's guilty. They're going to need a lot more than that to put him in front of a firing squad. But since every potential juror is tied to the University of Idaho, whether as a graduate, an employee, or a citizen that relies on that school to keep that town alive, then I think that the jury is tainted. And I think the fix is in. The defense, the prosecution, and even the judge are all buddy-buddy and U of I alums. Now, we all have been asking about the 3 unknown male DNA samples that were collected and who they belong to, and why in the world those haven't been tested makes absolutely no sense to me, unless they're trying to hide something and cover up maybe somebody they don't want to be identified. Who knows? I think this case boils down to power and money. And if you have enough of either, you get a pass in this case, no matter how absurd or full of lies your alibi is. Hell, if you're wealthy enough, they'll even clear you over the phone. I mean, no reason to bother you, no reason to waste your time, even if that means you literally have blood on your hands. But If you don't have money or power, then you might just get set up and framed for something you didn't really do. I've heard about the brass issue from Cluminati at first, and I have seen some other content on it as well, on DNA from Andrew Myers, Jules of All Trades, and the Thought Riot podcast all do good stuff. But I'd love to hear from you guys, and what do you think about this? So comment down below. I do want to thank the members of the Horns High Club. You guys are awesome, and I really appreciate your support. And if you want to join, it's only $1.99. But if you don't, that's fine too. I appreciate all of you that watch these, and we'll see you next time.